techniques in the visible and near infrared are extremely good at identifying, discriminating between healthy vegetation and stressed vegetation and vegetation that's so stressed it's not there anymore. It's actually a comparatively easy thing to do, one of the easier things to do with satellite data. There's a whole class of techniques called vegetation indices, of which this is probably the simplest example, the very famous NDVI, which stands for Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which is a slightly transformed ratio of reflectance, that's what the answer for, reflectance in the infrared to reflectance in the red part of the spectrum. When that ratio is, when that ratio is high, it's a signal that there is healthy vegetation with green leaves present. When it's low, it's an indication that that is not the case. Why that works is to do with plant physiology. It's to do with the characteristic reflectance properties of green leaf vegetation. It's a very simple thing to apply. You don't need to know much about your satellite image to calculate this thing. And it has been shown in lots of studies that it has a strong correlation with biophysically useful things like the leaf area index. That is one step away from something like the productivity. So it's good correlation with the amount of biology that's actually going on. Easy to measure and quite strongly correlated. So it's very good for assessing what I call vegetationally homogeneous areas. Areas where the same kind of plant functional group, maybe dwarf shrubs, maybe a particular kind of tree, exist. And it's used a lot. When it gets difficult to use is when there's a lot of vegetational diversity present. From our point of view, that's particularly an issue if there's a lot of lichen tundra present. Lichen tundra is something that doesn't have green leaves. It can be perfectly healthy, but it doesn't have green leaves. So it may actually show up as a low value of the vegetation index, but not be telling you anything bad about the state of the ecosystem. That's something you need to know about. There can be successional effects. You saw my horror pictures there in one of the most damaged, most impacted areas. There were actually still some green leaves there. They were growing birch scrub. That's actually a sign of an ecosystem in terminal decline, but there are green leaves. So you could be mistaken into thinking, because you detect a non-zero value of the vegetation index, that all is well in this region. And as anywhere in high latitudes, phenological variation, the seasons are incredibly short. The summer, from the point of view of a plant growing in the subarctic or the Arctic, might only be 4 weeks, 5 weeks long. And if you think about the time interval between the possibilities of acquiring satellite images like Landsat, that can be long compared with that. So if you have an image, a summer image, from such a place, it might be bang in the middle of the summer, it might be rather early in the summer, it might be rather late in the summer, and the difference between those dates might all fit into a space of 3 weeks or something like that. So you could be fooled by an early autumn, that kind of issue. So, some examples. This is the area around the Montregal's smelter. This is a part of a Landsat image which has been processed into false colour infrared, so that essentially areas that show the deepest red in a presentation like this have got a lot of green leaf vegetation going on. And on the right here is the same image processed into the NDVI, vegetation index. So the whiter it is here, the higher the vegetation index. So this is really just showing where the red parts of this image are here. And just to orient you, the black bits are water. This is part of a big lake called Lake Imandra. This area around here, sorry, this area up here is the town of Montregal, which also has the smelter in it. And then here is well, it's a mountain ridge actually, so it's quite high up, not much growing on it. Here is some rather lower terrain, which ought to have something growing on it, but doesn't anymore because it's been too heavily exposed to the smells of them. So these effects you can see perhaps rather more clearly here. So we see areas of essentially no vegetation here, here. So that's, as I say, that's quite an easy thing to do. Slightly more difficult is multispectral classification, where a typical satellite image, like from Landsat, will cover the part of the spectrum between the visible and the near infrared in of the order of 5 wave bands. So it's like colour photography with a few extra channels of information. If we're speaking of Landsat imagery, the resolution might be typically 30 meters. And the basic idea here is to recognise different land cover types by thus their spectral signature, their colour, so to speak, normally trained by field data, and there are computer algorithms for doing this. The more complicated the landscape, the more field work is necessary to train this. Essentially, if there are 50 different things present in a landscape that you would like to be able to identify in your classified satellite image, you're going to have to characterize each of those 50 different landscape units with a certain amount of field work, so you're going to be there for quite a long time. So the scope of field work will be set by that. In general, this is a very well-developed application. For vegetation mapping, it's well understood. It's good for boreal forest, or better, let's say. It's reasonable for tundra. Not as much work has been done on classification of tundra vegetation as for forest vegetation or lower latitude vegetation. Here's a old example. This is the area around Norilsk, the very nasty place in north central Siberia that I showed you. I could, but chose not to, put a key for this, but you can see there are of the order of 20 different colours here. Each colour represents a particular defined land cover classification.